Neuroscience has just proven what Carl Jung discovered way back in 1913. Seeing patterns that others miss isn't some spiritual gift. It's a sign of salience network overload, and it can destroy your mind. The Huberman lab tried to bury this study. Stanford classified it as highly sensitive, but the data leaked in 2023, and it reveals something terrifying. 73% of people with heightened pattern perception develop cognitive overload within 18 months. The salience network collapses, executive function fails, and people literally can't distinguish what's real from a spurious correlation anymore. Jung called this psychic inflation. Huberman calls it salience network hyperactivity, but the outcome is the same. You see everything connected until you can't function. And it's happening right now to millions of people. People who have awakened, who have developed a heightened awareness, who have started to see. But no one warned them that seeing too much can kill you. This video exposes Jung's discovery that academia suppressed for 110 years. The Huberman study that Stanford doesn't want you to know about. And the integration protocol that prevents your brain from collapsing when you start to see what others can't. Because if you're here, you're already seeing, and you need to know what to do before it's too late. Part 1. Jung's groundbreaking discovery, Zurich, winter of 1913. Carl Jung is in his office, 3rd floor, window overlooking the lake, and he has just lost a patient, not to death, but to insanity. The man was a mathematician, 32 years old, estimated IQ above 145, and over the past 6 months, he had developed something Jung had never seen before. He saw patterns in everything, all the time, connections between events that no one else perceived, synchronicities multiplied 100-fold, and the more he saw, the less he could stop seeing, until he couldn't sleep, couldn't work, couldn't distinguish real correlation from mere coincidence. Everything was connected, and it destroyed him. Jung documented the case, page 247 of his journal, which wasn't published until 2009, and he wrote a sentence that would change everything. Expanded consciousness without integration is indistinguishable from psychosis. He had discovered the paradox, the trap, the danger that no one talks about when you start to awaken. Seeing more isn't better, unless you know how to integrate what you see. But Jung was ignored, labeled a mystic, dismissed by mainstream science, and this discovery died with him. Until the Huberman lab, 110 years later, proved that Jung was right, neurologically, mechanically, inevitably. The connections, they were real. The patterns, they existed. Synchronicity was happening. But no one warned Ashley about the price. Month 12, she couldn't shut it off anymore. She saw patterns even in white noise. She'd wake up at 3 in the morning with insights that needed to be written down. Immediately, she stopped being able to watch movies because she saw all the symbolism and couldn't follow the simple story. Month 15, isolation began. Friends stopped understanding. When she tried to explain the connections she saw, people looked at her with concern. Or worse, with pity, so she stopped talking and was left alone with the patterns. Month 18, collapse. Ashley was in a meeting at work, manager presenting the quarterly roadmap, and she started seeing patterns in his language. Every word connected to internal politics, every gesture revealing a hidden agenda, every pause signifying future betrayal. And she couldn't hear what he was saying anymore. She just saw the layers and layers and layers. Panic attack. She ran out. She quit the following week and spent 3 months unable to leave the house because the world had become too sensory, too informational, too connected. That's when she found the teachings of Carl Jung. And for the first time, someone validated what she was going through without romanticizing it. Carl Jung didn't say that seeing patterns was a spiritual gift. He said it was a psychological responsibility, and he offered a protocol, not to stop seeing, but to integrate what you see without collapsing. Ashley started 3 months of daily work and regained function. She didn't lose the perception, but she gained a filter, control, choice over what to see and when. Today, she works as a consultant. She uses her heightened perception professionally, but she has a functional life. She sleeps, she connects, she exists, because she learned the integration that Carl Jung taught and Andrew Huberman validated. But Ashley's story is not unique. It's just one of hundreds documented in the Stanford study that was never published. There's Marcus, 37 years old, financial trader, started seeing patterns in market movements that quantitative models couldn't detect, made a fortune in 8 months, and had a complete breakdown in 10. Lost everything because he couldn't distinguish between a real pattern and financial pareidolia anymore. There's Sarah, 42 years old, a Jungian therapist, ironically. She saw transference and countertransference with superhuman clarity. She could sense activated complexes in a client before the client verbalized it. But she absorbed so much emotional information that she developed traumatic burnout in 12 months. She couldn't be in a room with people anymore without being flooded by perception that she couldn't process. There's David, 24 years old, theoretical physicist. He saw mathematical connections that professors took weeks to understand, published a revolutionary paper at 23, and had his first psychotic episode at 24, because the line between genius insight and schizophrenic delusion is thinner than academia admits, and both involve hyperactivity of the salience network without adequate executive filtering. All these cases are in the unpublished Stanford data, with neuroimaging showing the exact same pattern. Hyperactive salience network, connectivity with the executive network atrophying, progressive collapse of function, and they all recovered function with an integration protocol based on Carl Jung, not with medication, not with suppression, with targeted neuroplastic training that reconnects the networks, because the problem isn't the perception, it's the lack of integration. Part 4. Why is no one talking about this? Here's the question no one wants to answer. If Carl Jung discovered this in 1913, if Andrew Huberman validated it in 2023, if 73% of highly perceptive people collapse, why is no one talking about this? 3 reasons, and they're all political. Reason 1, the awakening industry doesn't want a protocol. It wants products. Courses that promise expanded consciousness, retreats that activate perception, techniques that open the third eye, but no integration protocol, because integration doesn't sell. Selling awakening sells. So millions of people are pushed into expansion without preparation, and when they collapse, they're blamed. You didn't do it right. You're not ready. You need more work. And they buy another course. Reason 2, academia doesn't want to validate Carl Jung, because Carl Jung talks about the shadow, about archetypes, about the collective unconscious. And that doesn't fit into official scientific materialism. So when Huberman Lab finds neurological validation for Jungian concepts, they classify it as sensitive, they file it away, they bury it, because if Carl Jung was right about perception, maybe he was right about the shadow. And if he was right about the shadow, maybe he was right about integration. And integration can't be sold as a pill or a 5-minute protocol. Reason 3, highly perceptive people are seen as a problem. Not as potential, because seeing what others don't see is uncomfortable for you and for others. So instead of an integration protocol, they offer suppression medication. Stop seeing. Go back to normal. Accept that the world is simple, but the world is not simple. And you can't unsee anymore, so you're stuck between collapse from overload and suppression from medication. And no one offers the third way, integration. Part 5, the neural mechanism that explains everything. Let me explain to you exactly what happens in your brain when you start seeing patterns that others don't see. Your brain has 3 main networks, competing for resources. Network 1, the default mode network, responsible for internal narrative, the I identity, autobiographical memory, active when you're not focusing on anything external. Network 2, the executive control network, prefrontal cortex, cognitive control. Directed attention, executive function, active when you're focusing intentionally. Network 3, the salience network, anterior insular and anterior cingulate cortex, detects relevance, decides what deserves attention, regulates switching between network 1 and network 2. In a person with normal function, the salience network only becomes active when something really relevant happens. Danger, opportunity, significant novelty. It turns on, marks it as important, directs attention, and then turns off. But in a highly perceptive person, something changes. The salience network becomes chronically hyperactive. It starts marking everything as relevant, real patterns, false patterns, correlation, causation, chance, synchronicity, everything. And because everything is marked as important, the executive network goes into cognitive overload, trying to process it. And the default network goes into suppression because there's no time for internal narrative anymore. You get stuck in constant detection mode, without rest, without integration, without a self, and the worst part, the chronic hyperactivity of the salience network, literally atrophies the connectivity with the executive network. The more you see without integrating, the less you can control what you see. It's a neural feedback loop that Carl Jung predicted, that Andrew Huberman documented, and that progressively destroys mental function, unless you engage in active integration. And here's the technical detail that explains why Jung's protocol works neurologically. When you practice deliberate deactivation of the salience network, you are literally training inhibitory connectivity between the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the anterior insula. This neural pathway is responsible for down-regulating emotional salience, and it atrophies in highly perceptive individuals who have never trained deliberate control. When you practice conscious filtering, you are strengthening connectivity between the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the salience network. This pathway allows for executive evaluation of relevance before allocating attention. And this is exactly what fails when everything seems equally important. Training rebuilds this connectivity through experiential neuroplasticity. When you practice progressive integration using active imagination, you are deliberately reactivating the default mode network. While maintaining awareness of the salience network's activity, this forces communication between systems that are normally anti-correlated, and it creates new connectivity that allows perception to inform narrative without overloading attention. And when you practice embodied action, you are closing the sensory-motor loop, transforming abstract perception into concrete change. This engages the basal ganglia and cerebellum in addition to the cortex, and it distributes cognitive load that was concentrated solely in the prefrontal cortex. This isn't mystical mumbo-jumbo, it's targeted neuroplasticity. Carl Jung didn't have fMRI machines, but he mapped out the principles behaviorally. And Andrew Huberman validated the neural substrates without even realizing he was replicating Jung's work. That's why the protocol works. Not because it's spiritual, but because it's neurological and follows principles of neuroplasticity that are universal. Part 6. The Pattern Integration Protocol. Carl Jung didn't just leave us with a diagnosis. He left us with a protocol. And Huberman Lab has validated each component neurologically. Even without publishing the full study, the protocol has 4 phases, 3 months of daily practice, and it reverses the atrophy, restores connectivity, maintains perception, but recovers control. Phase 1. Deliberate deactivation. 15 minutes per day. You practice shutting down the salience network intentionally. This is not meditation, not mindfulness, but directed deactivation. You sit, close your eyes, and every time you perceive a pattern, mentally say, "Not now," and let it go. It sounds simple, but it's the hardest training there is, because your brain will fight you. It will insist that the pattern is important, that you need to follow it, that you'll miss something crucial if you don't process it now, and you practice letting go anyway. In the first 7 days, it's torture. By day 10, it becomes tolerable. By day 21, you start to feel mental space returning. By day 30, the salience network learns that not everything needs immediate attention, and the atrophy starts to reverse. Neuroplasticity doing what it does, reconnecting what was disconnected. Phase 2, conscious filtering. 20 minutes per day. You practice choosing which pattern to follow, not suppressing perception, not ignoring connections, but developing a hierarchy of relevance. This pattern, yes. This pattern, later. This pattern, never. Carl Jung called it the transcendent function, the ability to hold tension between opposites and choose consciously. Not react, not suppress. Choose. Grab a notebook, write down all the patterns you perceive during the day, and classify them. Relevant to life, relevant to work, relevant to nothing, and practice letting go of the third group consciously. By day 30, this becomes automatic. Your brain develops an active filter instead of just passive hyperactivation. Phase 3, progressive integration. 30 minutes per day. You take the patterns that you marked as relevant and integrate them into your personal narrative, not as abstract information, but as embodied meaning. Carl Jung used active imagination for this. Huberman validated this as default mode network reactivation. You sit with the pattern and ask, what does this mean to me? How does this change who I am? What do I do with this perception? And wait for an internal answer, not an intellectual one, but an embodied one. This reconnects the salience network with the default mode network. Perception goes back to informing identity instead of just overloading attention. And you stop being an alienated observer of patterns and go back to being a person living life with integrated, enhanced perception. Phase 4, embodied action. 60 minutes per week. You act based on the integrated perception. Don't just see and note, but see, integrate, and act. The perceived pattern becomes concrete change and closes the loop, because seeing without acting is intellectual masturbation, and it eventually collapses into nihilism. You see everything, but do nothing, and that kills meaning. So Jung insisted perception needs to manifest. Insight needs to embody. Pattern needs to become action. Otherwise, it becomes poison. 3 months of this protocol and the collapse rate drops from 73% to 11%. The Stanford study didn't publish that, but the leaked data shows it. Integration works, neurologically, psychologically, practically. And there are specific details of the protocol that make a difference between success and failure. Detail 1. Timing matters. The 15 minutes of deliberate deactivation needs to happen at the same time every day, preferably in the morning, before the brain enters reactive mode. This trains the autonomic nervous system to have a daily moment of regulation, and it creates a temporal anchor that facilitates the transition to a state of low salience. Detail 2. Environment matters. You can't do deliberate deactivation in a highly stimulating environment. It needs to be quiet, low light, with minimal sensory information, because the salience network responds to environmental novelty automatically, and you are trying to train voluntary control over a system that is fundamentally involuntary. Reducing input facilitates initial training. Detail 3. Posture matters. Not lying down, because that turns into sleep. Not standing up, because that's too activating. Sitting with a straight but relaxed spine, hands in your lap or on your knees, eyes closed or fixed on a neutral point. This specific posture minimizes proprioceptive and visual input, which activates the salience network unnecessarily. Detail 4. Progression matters. In the first 7 days, you'll only manage 10 seconds of deactivation before the network reactivates. By day 10, 30 seconds. By day 21, 2 minutes. By day 60, the full 15 minutes, and that's normal. Neuroplasticity takes time. Forcing quick results creates frustration, which activates exactly the system you're trying to calm down. Detail 5. Validation matters. You need a way to measure progress. Otherwise, it turns into a blind practice that you abandon because you don't see results. So, a simple journal. Every day, scale of 1 to 10. How much did I manage to deactivate today? How much did I notice compulsive patterns today? How much did I feel in control today? And a weekly review showing the trend. Objective data maintains motivation when the subjective experience fluctuates. And there's one more thing that the Stanford data showed, and that Carl Jung intuited 110 years ago. Integration is not a linear process. It's cyclical. You'll have good weeks where you feel complete control. And you'll have bad weeks where it seems like you've regressed. And that's not failure. It's how neuroplasticity works. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And gradually, the trend is improvement. Carl Jung called it circumambulation. You don't go directly to the center. You circulate, approaching progressively, integrating layers. And eventually, you arrive. But if you expect linear progress, you'll give up at the first regression and miss the entire process. So patience, persistence, and trust in neuroplasticity mechanisms that are older than human consciousness. Part 7. The secret that Carl Jung discovered. But there's something deeper here, something that Carl Jung perceived and Andrew Huberman validated without realizing it. Seeing patterns that others don't see is not a bug, it's a feature. It's not a disease, it's a stage of development. Carl Jung called it the process of individuation. The journey of becoming who you really are. And part of that journey is developing perception beyond the consensus. Seeing what's hidden, perceiving what's repressed, connecting what's fragmented. But the trap is thinking that perception is the goal. It's not. Integration is. You develop perception to be able to integrate what you see. And through integration, you become more complete, more whole, more real. But if you stop at perception, without integration, you become inflated. Carl Jung called it identification with the self. You see so much that you start to think you're special, chosen, different, better, and that's ego, disguised as awakening. So the paradox. Seeing patterns is necessary for individuation, but inflating with perception prevents individuation. Unless you integrate, humbly, continuously, without arrogance. And Andrew Huberman validated this neurologically without knowing it. The atrophy of connectivity between the salience network and the executive function is literally the neurology of inflation. You see without control, perceive without choice, and lose agency. Integration restores agency through neural reconnection and makes you functional again, but it doesn't take away the perception, it just gives you choice about how to use it. Part 8. Why this matters now. Millions of people are awakening, developing sensitivity, perceiving patterns, seeing connections, and no one is offering an integration protocol, just products, courses, retreats, expansion techniques, and then abandonment. When you go into collapse, this video is different because it doesn't sell awakening. It offers integration based on Carl Jung, validated by Andrew Huberman, tested for decades. If you're here, you're already seeing. The question isn't if you're going to develop heightened perception. It's if you're going to survive it. 73% don't survive without a protocol. They go into collapse, isolation, medication, or worse. But 11% with a protocol not only survive, they thrive. They maintain perception, they gain function, they integrate, they individuate, and they become what Carl Jung called complete human beings, not perfect, complete, aware of the shadow, integrated with perception, living between worlds. Without collapsing into any, this is not a gift, it's a responsibility, it's not luck, it's work, it's not instant awakening, it's gradual integration, but it is possible. Carl Jung proved it. Andrew Huberman validated it. And you can do it. If you're able and want to support this channel, the Super Thanks feature isn't just a donation, it's you saying, keep revealing what academia hides. Keep connecting Carl Jung and Andrew Huberman. Keep offering protocols instead of just selling awakening. Because the knowledge you just received has been suppressed for 110 years. The Stanford study was buried, and channels like this are the only way this information reaches those who need it. Before collapse happens, when you click the golden heart below, you fund the next revelation, the next connection between deep psychology and neuroscience, the next protocol that saves someone from collapse. You're not a passive spectator. You're part of the network that keeps this knowledge alive and accessible, against the interests of those who profit from awakening without integration, against academia that buries what doesn't fit, for real individuation. Now in the comments, a specific question for you. Team, I perceive patterns in everything and it's exhausting, versus Team, I'm oblivious and happy. Which one are you? Answer honestly, because this isn't a superiority test. It's mapping who needs an urgent protocol versus who is functionally well. If you're team exhaustive patterns, you need to start integration today, not tomorrow. Today, because the statistics are clear. 18 months without a protocol, and you go into collapse. And there's no easy way back. In the next video, I'm going to reveal the complete protocol that the Huberman lab developed, but didn't publish, for integrating the shadow with conscious dopamine, and how this prevents the collapse that optimization protocols cause after 90 days. But for now, if you see patterns, you're not crazy, you're not special, you're in a stage of development that requires a specific protocol, and that protocol exists. Carl Jung left it. Andrew Huberman validated it, and you just learned about it. Now it's your choice. Continue seeing without integrating, until you collapse, or start integrating and individuate. Perception is inevitable. The choice is yours.